In the dense, shadowy undergrowth of Crocea Ivy's jungle, Dr. Sarah Evans crouched low, her breath shallow as the sound of heavy, reptilian footsteps approached. Behind her, Ben, injured and barely conscious, leaned against a gnarled tree root, his eyes pleading for safety. Suddenly, a loud, guttural roar shattered the eerie calm, freezing Sarah's blood. She clutched a makeshift spear, its tip dipped in a shimmering, viscous liquid extracted from the deadly flora around them. As the footsteps neared, Sarah whispered with fierce determination, "Not today, Krell. Not without a fight." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but the resolve it carried was enough to pierce the suffocating fear. The underbrush rustled violently, revealing the glaring eyes of Warlord Krell's scout, ready to pounce. In the dense, mist-laden jungles of Crocea 4, a low rumble vibrated through the towering ferns and twisted vines, sending a flock of iridescent creatures skyward. The oppressive humidity clung to Dr. Sarah Evans as she navigated through the undergrowth, her boots sinking into the spongy soil with every determined step. The remnants of her research team, a once spirited group of scientists and explorers, now reduced to a harried band of survivors, followed closely, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. "Keep moving," Sarah whispered, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her stomach. "We're not far from the ravine, it should give us some cover." Behind her, Ben limped along, supported by another technician, his face pale and drawn from an infected wound. Every now and then he winced, but his determination to keep up was palpable. Sarah's heart ached at the sight. Ben, who had once rigged their lab equipment with such enthusiasm, now struggling to walk. The alien jungle of Crocea 4 was unforgiving. Its beauty, a perilous facade. Every plant and creature seemed to thrive on the very edge of hostility, including the silent stalker who hunted them, Warlord Krell, leader of the planet's dominant reptilian species. His disdain for the human intruders was clear. The bodies of 2 crew members they'd found just days prior were a gruesome testament to his intent. As the team edged closer to the ravine, a sudden crack of a branch snapped Sarah's head around. Her hand flew to the machete at her belt. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, the only sounds the distant calls of predatory birds and the soft rustle of leaves. Then, all at once, the jungle erupted into chaos. A warrior, scales glinting with a menacing hue, burst through the foliage. Sarah reacted instinctively, swinging her machete in a wide arc. The blade met scaly flesh, and a guttural roar filled the air. "Run!" Sarah yelled, pushing Ben ahead of her. The ravine was in sight now, their only chance. They plunged through the last thicket, tumbling down the embankment just as a volley of darts whizzed where their heads had been seconds before. Panting, Sarah scanned the area, her brain ticking through options. They were cornered, with Krell's warriors likely to follow. But Sarah wasn't just a biologist, she was a survivor. She had noticed something earlier, something about the native flora that might be their only edge. Pulling a compact field guide from her pocket, she quickly flipped through the pages, her fingers stopping on an image of a vine known for its paralytic properties. If her hunch was right, they could use this to their advantage. "Here," she said, handing the book to the nearest crew member. "Gather as much of this as you can find. Be careful not to touch it directly. It's our best shot." As the team set to work, Sarah allowed herself a moment to watch over them, her gaze lingering on Ben. His resilience, their resilience, fueled her. They weren't just going to lay down and die. Not today, not while she still drew breath. Under the heavy canopy of Crocea Ivy's jungle, Dr. Sarah Evans moved silently, her eyes scanning the lush undergrowth for the lethal tools nature provided. The humid air was thick with the scent of overripe fruits and decomposing leaves, a testament to the cycle of life and death on this alien planet. The paralytic vine, her newfound hope, hung innocuously among its deadly brethren, its tendrils swaying slightly in the moist breeze. "Careful with that," Sarah instructed softly, watching as Jules, her youngest team member, used makeshift gloves crafted from thick leaves to handle the vine. "We need enough for a dozen traps." Jules nodded, his eyes wide with the gravity of their task. Like this, Dr. Evans? He asked, holding up a severed piece of the vine, the sap oozing out slowly. Yes, exactly like that. Make sure to keep the sap contained, it's as precious as it is dangerous, Sarah responded, her mind racing through the next steps of their survival plan. They processed the vine carefully, extracting its potent neurotoxin into small containers. Sarah knew that if applied correctly, this natural weapon could give them the edge they desperately needed. As they worked, Sarah recounted to Jules how she'd first seen the effects of the toxin. I watched a thorn-necked lizard seize up after brushing against this vine. The creature was paralyzed within minutes, she explained, ensuring her team understood the potency and danger of their endeavor. The gravity of using such a method weighed on her, but the stark choice between their lives and their ethics had never been clearer. We do this to survive, she affirmed, more to herself than to Jules. Once they had secured a sufficient amount of the toxin, Sarah led the team to a narrow pass that Krell's warriors frequently used, a strategic choke point perfect for their traps. With precise movements, they rigged the vines across the path, camouflaging the deadly barriers with the surrounding foliage. Think these will stop them? Jules asked, wiping sweat from his brow as he stepped back to survey their handiwork. They'll slow them down at least, Sarah replied, checking each setup. It gives us time, and right now, that's what we need. As dusk began to fall, painting the sky with streaks of purple and red, Sarah felt the weight of their day's work settle around her. It was a temporary measure, a small victory in the looming shadow of the threat they faced. Back at their makeshift camp, as they gathered around a small fire built under a sheltering overhang, Sarah shared their success with Ben, who had stayed behind due to his injuries. We've set the traps along the pass, she told him, her voice low but fierce with a tinge of hope. We might have a real chance now. Ben, looking up from his resting place, managed a weak smile. Leave it to you, Sarah, to turn the jungle itself into an ally. Their laughter, small and hushed in the encroaching night, was a brief respite from the constant danger. But it bolstered their spirits, knitting them closer together in the face of adversity. The pale light of dawn seeped through the dense foliage of Crasha 4, casting long shadows that danced on the trembling leaves. Dr. Sarah Evans, her face etched with lines of determination and fatigue, watched the narrow pass from a hidden vantage point. The traps laden with paralytic toxin were set, and her breath caught every time the leaves rustled. Anything yet? Whispered Jules, his voice barely audible over the hum of the jungle's morning chorus. Not yet. Keep your eyes sharp. This waiting is the hardest part, Sarah replied, her gaze never wavering from the path below. As the sun climbed higher, the tense anticipation of the ambush was palpable among the team members concealed in their hideouts. Then, a rustle louder than the morning breeze swept through the undergrowth, and a hulking figure stepped into view. Krell's scout, the vanguard of the hunting party. Sarah's hand tightened around the makeshift spear she held, her other hand raised in a silent signal to her team. The scout, his scales a mottled green that shimmered against the foliage, paused, his head tilting as if sensing the air. Now, Sarah breathed, and at her signal, Jules pulled the tripwire. The vine whipped forward, the toxin-coated thorns sinking into the scout's leg. He roared, a sound that shook the leaves around them, and stumbled forward, his movements becoming staggered as the toxin took effect. Encouraged by their initial success, Sarah signaled for the second phase of the trap. Carefully, she led the team to a nearby clearing where they had previously smeared the tree's sap known to attract Crasha ivy's ferocious insectids. As Krell's warriors, alerted by the scout's roar, rushed to his aid, they crossed into the clearing. The air filled with the buzzing of wings as swarms of the predatory insects descended, drawn by the sap. The warriors flailed wildly, unprepared for the ferocity of the assault. Move out! Sarah ordered, leading her team away from the chaos. They moved quickly and quietly, using the distraction to cover more ground away from the ambush site. The jungle echoed with the sounds of confusion and distress as the warriors contended with the dual threats of paralysis and the insected swarm. Sarah knew this reprieve would not last long. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Krell's forces. As they paused to catch their breath in a thick grove, Sarah checked on each of her team members, her eyes lingering on Ben, who had managed the trek despite his injuries. "We've bought some time, but Krell will be more cautious now," she said, addressing the group. "We need to keep moving and use every advantage we have." Ben nodded, a grim set to his jaw. "Your plan worked, Sarah. You've given us a fighting chance." Sarah looked back toward the way they had come, where the sounds of turmoil had begun to fade. "We're not out of this yet. Krell won't stop, and neither will we. We have to reach the extraction point." With a renewed sense of urgency, the team set off again, deeper into the heart of the jungle. Sarah led them, her mind already racing through possible strategies and contingencies. Each step they took was a testament to human resilience, their survival hinging on her ability to turn the alien world's own secrets against those who called it home. As dusk enveloped the dense jungle of Krasha 4, the thick canopy above muted the remaining daylight, casting the forest floor into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Dr. Sarah Evans, her face smeared with mud for camouflage, motioned for her team to halt and take cover. They nestled into a grove dense with ferns, their breaths shallow, the air thick with the tension of impending confrontation. "Stay low and stay quiet," Sarah instructed, her eyes scanning the dense foliage for signs of movement. The earlier skirmishes had thinned Krell's ranks but had only hardened his resolve. Now, the warlord himself was on their trail, a testament to his mounting frustration and rage. As if on cue, a rustling echoed through the trees, more deliberate than the random stirrings of wildlife. Through the brush, the imposing figure of Warlord Krell emerged, his reptilian eyes scanning the undergrowth, a serrated blade gleaming in his hand. Sarah's heart pounded against her chest, but her mind was razor sharp. Hidden beside her, in the undergrowth, was the bioluminescent fungus they had collected earlier. Its eerie glow was known to be an ill omen among Krell's people, a harbinger of cursed lands. "Now, Jules," Sarah whispered, giving the cue. Jules, with a subtle nod, disturbed the patch of ground where they had buried the fungus. It began to glow, casting a haunting light that flickered like ghostly flames through the ferns. Krell halted, his body tensing as his gaze landed on the glowing fungus. A low growl rumbled from his throat, the sound mingling with the sudden, uneasy silence from his warriors. "What witchcraft is this?" Krell's voice boomed through the trees, laced with a mix of anger and superstition. Sarah stepped forward, her figure shadowed and face obscured. "You tread on cursed ground, Krell," she called out, her voice steady and imbued with a feigned mystical quality. "Leave these lands, or face the wrath of the spirits you disturb." Krell's warriors shuffled nervously, murmuring among themselves. The warlord's eyes narrowed, his gaze trying to pierce through the dim light to see the source of the voice. "This land belongs to no spirits," Krell retorted, but his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Seizing the moment of doubt, Sarah continued, "You have been warned. The spirits do not forgive." With a flick of her hand, Sarah signaled Jules, who gently shook a nearby tree, causing a shower of the luminescent spores to drift down like spectral snow. The effect was immediate. Krell's warriors, already on edge, backed away, their eyes wide with fear. Krell stood alone, his figure rigid against the supernatural tableau unfolding before him. With a final, menacing glance toward the glowing spores, he turned and retreated, his departure as silent as his arrival had been foreboding. As the threat receded into the jungle's depths, Sarah let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The team emerged from hiding, their expressions a mix of relief and awe. "We did it," Ben murmured, his voice weak but filled with admiration. "We did," Sarah agreed, though her eyes remained on the shadowed path Krell had taken. "But we should keep moving. Superstitions only hold for so long." As the first hint of dawn painted the horizon with a tender glow, Dr. Sarah Evans and her team approached the designated extraction point, a small clearing encircled by towering ironwood trees. The night's events had left them in a temporary bubble of safety, but the weight of exhaustion was palpable, pulling heavily on their shoulders. "We're almost there," Sarah murmured, her voice a reassuring whisper to her weary team. They moved with a quiet urgency, each step bringing them closer to rescue and further from the dangers of Krasha IV's unforgiving wilderness. Upon entering the clearing, Sarah scanned the area with practiced eyes. "Set up a perimeter, and keep your comms open," she instructed, her tone authoritative, leaving no room for debate. Her team complied, spreading out to secure the area with the last ounces of their energy. Ben, nursing injuries but still mobile, approached Sarah. "Do you think Krell will come back?" he asked, his voice tinged with both fear and admiration for Sarah's daring strategies throughout their ordeal. Sarah looked towards the dense jungle, its dark shadows gradually receding with the rising sun. "He might. But we'll be ready if he does," she responded, her voice firm and confident, masking the undercurrent of doubt that lingered in her mind. As they prepared their signal for pickup, the distant hum of a shuttle's engines grew louder, cutting through the early morning stillness like a beacon of hope. Relief surged through the group, visible in their tired smiles and sagging shoulders. "Signal's strong. They've seen us," Jules announced, holding up the transmitter which flickered with the promise of their imminent rescue. Gathering in the center of the clearing, the team watched as the shuttle descended, its landing lights piercing the lingering darkness. In that moment, Sarah felt a surge of peace, allowing herself to believe they might just make it out alive. As they boarded the shuttle, Sarah took one last look at the jungle. The planet had been a brutal adversary, but also a formidable teacher. Her mind replayed every close call, every moment of fear, every triumph. The lessons of Krasha 4 wouldn't easily fade. Sitting beside Ben on the shuttle, Sarah finally allowed the adrenaline to drain from her veins. "You asked me once if I thought we'd make it," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "I remember," Ben replied, his voice stronger now, colored with the light of survival. "I wasn't sure then. But I knew I wouldn't give up. Not on you, not on any of us." Ben reached out, squeezing her hand. "Your determination saved us, Sarah. You turned this alien hell into a lesson on human resilience." The shuttle ascended, leaving the jungle and its hidden dangers behind. As Krasha 4 shrank beneath them, Sarah pondered their future. They had survived through unity and human ingenuity, traits that would define their return to civilization. "What now, Dr. Evans?" Jules asked, his tone a mixture of exhaustion and curiosity. Sarah smiled, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond the shuttle's window. "Now we go home. We heal. And we use what we've learned to come back stronger."